If you remember, last time I said I would talk to you about medicine in Greece. Now, just as Imhotep was the god of medicine, the healer in Egypt, Asclepius was the god of medicine in Greece. There's one distinguishing feature. Imhotep was a real person in history. He has been described, as I told you, in detail in Egyptian papyri. It's doubtful whether Asclepius was a person who is mythological, a legend, or whether he was in fact a real individual living in our world. You probably know that there were many gods in Egypt. They were all adept in healing and preventing disease. There was, for example, Apollo. For example, there was Athena, the great goddess. You have a temple in her name, as you well know, a beautiful temple on the Acropolis. You have also Artemis. And in the underworld, you have Pluto, the most important of the underworld gods, as also Proserpina and Cerberus. Now, these underworld gods were also adept in healing and in treating disease and preventing disease. It is believed that the cult of Asclepius probably started with the worship of these underworld gods, in particular Pluto. Now, let me tell you more about Asclepius. He was supposed to have moved about with a big staff in his hand, and amazingly, on that staff was the emblem of a serpent. And that indeed today is also the emblem in medicine, even today. Now, how did the serpent come about? I think it's mythological. Probably, on the one hand, it represents the fact that the serpent sheds its skin at periodic intervals, and the skin comes back, signifying healing. It could also be a symbol in that it might represent dark, mysterious, subterranean forces. A symbol of the god of healing in very ancient times, particularly practiced amongst the Semitic races in the Middle East. Now let me tell you about the legend of Asclepius. It is believed, the legend goes, the myth goes, that it was a union between Apollo, the god, and a nymph named Coronis that gave birth to Asclepius. Now the nymph, being more flirtatious than usual, decided also to flirt with mortals. Apollo sees that, and he considers that a grave transgression of the laws of heaven in those days. The mortals were not supposed to have any relations with the gods, and the gods with the mortals. So he shoots an arrow and kills her. This is the time when he's just delivering the baby. Asclepius was born, and he grows up to be a great healer. So much so that legend goes that he could make the dead come alive, and he could prevent the very sick from dying. This led Pluto in the underworld to be very angry, because he said that his underworld was getting unpopulated, and he wanted more people in his underworld. He wanted to rule over far more people. So he protests to the god Jupiter. Jupiter listens to him and he throws a thunderbolt onto Asclepius and strikes him dead. However, he carries him to the abode of the gods at Mount Olympus. And from there, it is believed, legend says, of course this is a legend, that Asclepius comes down to the world as a mortal man, extremely powerful in the art and science of healing. Now, they looked up to this person to such an extent that there were temples built in his name. Temples scattered all over mainland Greece and all over the islands in the Aegean Sea. And the first temple was as early as 750 BC. And what did these temples do? People who desired to get well, people who are ill and desired to get well, would go to these temples. There would be a ritual of bathing, ritual of sort of purification before they were admitted to the sanctum sanctorum. And there again, after further purification, they were made to go to sleep on a sheepskin. It is believed they were given something, a draught of something or the other, some medicine or the other, to give them sleep. And it is believed that in this sleep or during this deep sleep, Asclepius would come down and would do the healing. And there were remarkable stories to show that this really did happen. For example, it is written that a man who was blind in one eye, when he got up in the morning, could see with both eyes. Now, all these healings that took place were scripted on a marble slab and placed on the walls of the temple, so that the votaries would know that this is indeed a place of healing. You would say, how did this come about? And there were many such instances. How did this come about? It came about because of faith. Faith is as old as the world, as old as medicine. There are examples of this here as well. Look at Lourdes, for example. Documentations of people who are very ill had been pronounced as incurable, coming to Lourdes and getting well. So faith is extremely important. People cannot just denigrate it and say that, oh, there is nothing to it like that. It is of great, great importance. Let me quote Osler, the great physician of the 20th century, when he said, faith is indeed a wonderful force, a force that cannot be weighed in the balance nor tested in a crucible. Beautifully put. Talking of modern medicine today, faith is extremely important. How can the patient get faith in the doctor? It is only when he listens to the patient, talks to the patient, questions the patient, touches the patient, examines the patient, that there can be faith between the doctor and the patient. Faith is one important aspect, a binding force which joins the doctor and the patient in a mutual, respectful, trusting relationship. It has been there for all time. It has been there and has been hallowed by time. So I can't tell you how important it is in modern medicine as well to remember that building faith between the doctor and the patient is extremely important, because it binds the doctor and the patient in a trusting relationship. And the doctor-patient relationship lies, my friends, at the heart of clinical medicine. So that's about the Asclepian faith. Mind you, amazingly, the Asclepian temples were studied all over mainland Greece and all over the islands in the Aegean Sea, but not in the island of Kos, where Hippocrates taught for some reason or the other. And therefore, the Asclepian cult did not come into did not come into the island of Kos at all, where Hippocrates taught a different sort of medicine. Now, it is worth remembering that the Aesculapian cult was all right, but the Greek mind was a very inquisitive mind. It was an inquiring mind. It was not easily satisfied by things that it couldn't see, it couldn't observe. And that is one reason why rational and scientific medicine, which started on the island of Kos, and the philosophical medicine, which started in the Italic school on the southern coast of Italy, triumphed over the cult of Aesculapius. So in due course of time, the cult of Aesculapius slowly began to diminish. Though mind you, temples to Aesculapius, as I mentioned, were found or were present and were used till 330 AD. Now I wish to talk to you about the Italic school of medicine on the southern coast of Italy. This was a great school. The founders of the scientific aspect of medicine lay in the hands of the philosophers of ancient Greece. And they had founded a school on the southern coastline of Italy. The place where this was largely founded was a place called Croton. I'm sure that it must be having a different name now. And the man who was mostly responsible for this renowned school was the philosopher Pythagoras. You all have heard of Pythagoras' theorem. Let me tell you something about him. He was a man, thinking about philosophy in the Isle of Samos, again in the Aegean Sea. Samos at that time was ruled by a tyrant called Polycrates. And to escape this tyrant, Pythagoras goes to the southern coast of Italy, and one of the chief founders of this Italic school was Pythagoras. Now, besides founding the school of Pythagoras, what did he do? He was astonishingly fond of numbers. He felt that anything in life could be expressed in numbers. And he was extremely fond of geometry. He was extremely fond of mathematics, of music and astronomy. And he said that music, in fact, was a manifestation of mathematics, a rhythmical form of mathematics. That's besides the point. What impressed me immensely was a remarkable observation that he makes. He said that the whole world was a macrosome. The universe was a macroscope. And it was governed by harmony, by balanced contrasts, and by a sense of proportion. And the human being, he said, was a microsome of that macrosome, governed by the same principles of harmony and balance. This is indeed striking. It tells you that the human being is a universe in himself or herself, and that he is a small microscope present in a macrosome of infinity. It is indeed striking. It almost gives you a spiritual link between this microscope and that huge macroscope, and the forces that control it, that harmonize it, and that is responsible for its movement and evolution. I think that's a remarkable statement and a remarkable philosophical statement which holds perhaps to this day. Now, there were many people in this Italic school besides Pythagoras, Many of them became very famous doctors. Just as an aside, there was a doctor, I can't quite remember his name. I think he was Demosthenes or something. He was a great doctor who practiced in Athens and went over and practiced then in Samos, the same place where Polycrates was. And when Polycrates died, he was asked by the king of Persia, Darius, to help him with an injury to his ankle. So he goes over there. The king had a dislocation of his ankle, which he sets right. Then he asks him to see the queen, who has an abscess on the breast. He sets that right. And when he asks to leave, he says, I can give you anything in the world you want, but I will not allow you to leave. I will not give you that freedom. That upset this doctor very, very much indeed. And he had a nice ruse. He tells Darius, you know what, I am going to Greece and I am going to tell all the leaders of Greece, of the various islands, not to be antagonist to Greece, but to be friendly with Greece. And on that condition, he goes and of course never returns. He is welcomed there with open arms. So that was the Italic school. Now, the Italic school, if you remember, this school of philosophy was based on reason. They questioned everything. Medicine started from philosophy. How did it do so? It did so, but the first thing that the philosophers asked was, what is man? How does he function? How does he connect to the outside world? Is he part of nature or is he separate? What is it that contributes to his health? What makes him ill? And how can we keep him healthy and happy so that he has a normal, long life? That, my friends, was the start of medicine. Now, as you know, as somebody has said, as a poet has said, the study of mankind is man. And the study of mankind is a study of history. And if the study of man is really medicine, you see how there is a link between history and medicine. And if that started in philosophy, you have a link between history, medicine, and philosophy. I think that's worth stressing, and it's so important. So the foundations of rational medicine lay in the hands of these philosophers. And it was the spirit of inquiry which was responsible for that. The spirit of asking why for everything that they saw. The spirit of using reason and logic more than anything else to find out what is happening. It was that which started medicine on its actual rational path. Now there were many, many medical schools besides the one in southern Italy. There were medical schools scattered all over the Aegean Islands. There were medical schools even in colonies in North Africa. All of them were good. There was this one which particularly comes to my mind, and that is Sindus. It was, I'm not quite sure where it was. It was perhaps, I think, in one of the islands in the Aegean Sea. And they had the Sindian maxims. And these were prescriptions written out for various diseases that were found and were existed at that point in time.